growing up, Timex watches were minging. Most of them looked bland, felt cheap, and sounded even worse. But Timex turned out to be the ugly kid from school who grew up to be an OnlyFans millionaire. Why couldn't I have been that ugly kid? Indeed, out of all the affordable watch brands I've looked at, Timex is one of the best at making their budget watches look expensive. In fact, they've released some of the outright best watches under 500 quid over the last couple of years. Now, admittedly, they're not all made equal. Like most budget brands, for every banger, they've got 3 or 4 that are bang average at best. That's just the way it is. Some hit and some miss. So today, I thought it would be interesting to show you the most extreme ends of this spectrum. Here are 20 of the very best Timex watches I've tried over the last few years, as well as a handful that I'd actually recommend steering clear of. I'll have them all linked in the video description for your convenience. We've got dress watches, field watches, GMTs, dive watches, everything you can think of basically. And bar 2 of them, these were all purchased with my own money, to my wife's great displeasure. I even bought a bunch of additional watches, especially for this video, including several little known gems you've probably never seen, just to mix things up a bit. So yeah, we'll go category by category. Let's get into it. Surprisingly, I'm going to start with digitals, which isn't really something always associated with Timex. Sure, they've got the Ironman series, which is fairly well known, and we'll get to that in a minute. Aside from that though, they've struggled to compete with the likes of Casio over the years, until now perhaps. The Continental Q80 is Timex's latest effort in this category, and in many ways is their best so far. With full stainless steel construction, a sleek thin case, an Indiglo backlight, and a clean design reminiscent of the PRX Digital but for far less money, the Q80 is the first decent Casio alternative we've seen for some time. In fact, Casio's most direct competitors to this, the steel-cased A1000 and the Casio Reissue, both suffer from major flaws in design or pricing that make this Timex feel even more competitive. Compared to the most popular digital watches like the old resin Casios, this one is quite a bit larger at 39mm across, which could be decisive depending on your wrist size. I frequently get commenters telling me that the nice looking Casios are too small for them at around 32 to 35mm. So this 39mm option may tick a lot of people's boxes. That said, if you like the subtle disappears on the wrist feel you get with those small Casios, you may want to look elsewhere. Despite being well integrated and constructed of solid steel links, the bracelet also suffers from a subpar clasp that lacks any form of micro adjustment, which is a real oversight. As such, if a strap-equipped version comes out at any point, I'd certainly lean towards that instead if you can. Still, the Q80 is a strong and remarkably stylish digital watch with all the core functions you need, as well as 5-bar water resistance and a mineral crystal, which are both upgrades over most Casios. Not perfect, but certainly one of the better digital contenders. For more performance-focused digitals, the Ironman range is the obvious place to head. This sporty line has proved successful ever since it was introduced in the 1980s, originally as a development of Timex's existing triathlon range, targeting professional athletes. These days, I'd say the Ironman series is seen as more of a durable G-Shock alternative by the general public, given its rugged construction and strong aquatic performance. Of course, you can use this for its intended purpose if smartwatches aren't your thing, given its many onboard running-focused timing functions. Crucially, the Ironman watches are cheaper than most G-Shocks and are often smaller too, which could make them an outright better choice for your use case. I've always preferred even smaller watches like the Casio F91 for weekend work, but if you want a time-tested classic that can take a licking, the Ironman will keep on ticking. Well, it would if it had a second hand. Actually, Timex just introduced an analog Ironman version as well, but I'm not sure exactly how I feel about it. I previously tried one of Timex's resin-cased digitals as well, the T78, but that was basically inferior to Casio's offerings in every way, so I'd recommend steering clear despite the tempting large display. Next, we move to GADA watches, the go-anywhere, do-anything models you can easily wear both for fun or for more formal occasions if required. Timex has some really unique offerings in this category, the first of which is the Marlin Jet. I reviewed this one when it released, and the visuals absolutely blew me away. With its all-encompassing crystal that wraps entirely around the bezel, together with a curved dial and polished accents, the Marlin Jet really lived up to its space-age naming. Despite having a basic pearl-on strap and a fairly chunky profile, this one still has a surprisingly luxurious air for a watch that cost me well under £300. At first, the Jet looked like it was going to be a limited edition release, though this silver white has since returned in some regions, and they've also added some new versions to the lineup. though I think the original remains the optimal choice. It's automatic with a steel case and, as you may have guessed from the insane form factor, an acrylic crystal. Good luck accomplishing that with any other material. At 38mm, it's also sized really nicely for most arms. Far from a spec monster, but there's truly nothing else like the Marlin Jet on the market right now, especially at this price. One of the most unique and sexy affordable watches you can get. Things get even more wild when we get to our next pair of quartz watches, the Q-Timex Falcon Eye and Dégradé. Both of these offer the same sort of thing as each other. They're each reissues of vintage Timex models from the late 1970s with modern materials and finishing touches. What they also have in common are the ridiculous dial surfaces. These two are crazy, with vertical wave-like patterns that are actually pretty impressive for watches that usually retail for well under £200. I mean, they aren't for the faint-hearted, especially the brighter Falcon Eye, but they are at least extremely cool. The Dégradé even takes this a step further, with an internally faceted crystal whose subtle creases align perfectly with the dial peaks beneath. Together, these are among the sportiest watches on this list, with their hooded lugs and steel bracelets, though I suspect you could easily pull them off with more formal attire too, especially if you opt for the more restrained colours the Falcon Eye now ships in. I'd say the Dégradé is marginally the better made of the two, with nicer brushing on the case and a better quality bracelet. However, both are guilty of harbouring loud ticking noises and scratch-prone acrylic crystals, which can be annoying. If you can overlook that, these offer some super jazzy vibes for relatively little cash. I still have the smaller Dégradé in my collection, and it sees occasional use, mainly thanks to the cool styling. Another watch with cool styling is the Timex E-Line Automatic. Now this is the definition of a GADA watch, with an even more versatile design than the last three. It's also the definition of an insane value watch. I mean, just look at it. What a beauty. The E-Line looks straight out of a luxury design magazine, sharing many of the same sporty characteristics as much higher-end watches for a mere £199. That's like $230 or something. Not only that, but it's better spec than the last two as well, as this even packs in an automatic movement and a better finished steel case, which is the true unsung hero here. It's perfectly sculpted, scooping up the sides of that squared off crystal, and Timex has managed to keep the whole package pretty slim considering it's using a chunky Miyota 8217. Don't let the size put you off either. It may technically be 34mm, but if you've ever tried a square watch, you'll know they wear a heck of a lot larger. This is much more like a 37mm watch, so while it's hardly large, it's much more viable than you'd initially expect. Here it is on my 6¼ inch wrist, a place it's occupied more times than I can count over the last few months. Frankly, it's a struggle to find anything I couldn't wear with the E-Line Automatic. It looks good with just about anything. The bracelet certainly adds to that flexibility in more ways than one. Most versions ship on this expansion band, which is by far the best of its type that I've come across. It's got this clever adjustment system, meaning you can change the size in seconds, and overall, it doesn't pluck nearly as badly as other expansion bands I've tried. The flawless 5-star reviews on the Timex site suggest I'm not alone in that assessment. Other colours and versions are available with a leather band instead, but I'd urge you to give this a chance. An absolute do-it-all bargain. For an even dressier take, the Marlin line is another avenue worth exploring. The most popular in this range is the hand-wound 34mm reissue, though there are also other 40mm automatics available with some updated visuals. What struck me was just how thin the hand-wound version is. Now the movement inside isn't very impressive, it's just a Chinese Seagull mechanical, but boy is the resultant form factor ideal for this watch. It looks and feels just like a vintage mid-century watch with the domed crystal and sunburst dial. Because of the tiny movement, you also get a super sleek on-wrist profile that gives you even more of that Mad Men aesthetic. The Marlin is a watch I think you're either gonna love or hate. It's got unusual markers and hands, particularly on the standard champagne dial model, and it's also underwhelming as far as specs go. Still, the stock strap is decent, the movement is quiet enough, and the sunburst dial is impressive for the cost. Timex also makes other variants of this watch from time to time, including this chocolate brown model you've probably seen on screen. With its silver detailing, it could be argued that this version surpasses the original in terms of looks. Who knows what they're going to come out with next? For a far more modern take, it's worth keeping your eyes out for the now discontinued Midtown. This minimalist model is still available for under £100 on a couple of grey market sites and offers some really cool details, including a curved chapter ring that contains these intriguing cutout owl markers, which I think look great up close. It's got reasonable materials for the money and is a crowd-pleasing 38mm wide, but does lack Indiglo, which its forebearer, the Fairfield, used to have. The Fairfield, by the way, which used to be popular a few years back, it may be a decent buy if you can grab it for well under £50. Past that though, there are much better steel-cased options available on AliExpress these days, which trump the brass-cased Fairfield in terms of durability and finishing. You'll probably have a bit more luck finding the Galli S1, which is among Timex's most expensive offerings. This one is a 38mm watch, but they also used to make this one in 41 as well, and I'm not sure this green is available anymore either, but there are some more versatile colours still on offer. What do you get for that step up to around £400 then? Well, you get a case that's absolutely insane. Now, the first unit I tried did have a botched bezel release notch, which was eventually switched after some back and forth with Timex. Looking past that error, this injection molded case is otherwise a borderline masterpiece. The brushing and polishing are immaculate. The whole shell is hollowed out, and you get ringed engravings across the inner case area as well as on the crown. If you switch the logo, you'd think that the Galli S1 was a multi-$1,000 watch, no question. The Miyota 9039 powering it also aids the illusion, giving the second hand a noticeably smoother sweep than most of the automatics on this list. If you can shell out for the Galli, it's mostly money well spent. Just check the QC when you receive it. I was also pretty impressed when I received the new 39mm Continental GMT, mainly because it reminded me of the Tissot PRX for a lot less money. Indeed, this integrated bracelet quartz watch starts from around £145, and not only packs in a textured dial, but even that added GMT complication for almost half the cost of the closest Tissot equivalent. The case finishing is surprisingly good. The case itself is pleasingly thin for a GMT, and you can grab it on either a steel bracelet or a modified rubber strap. The crystal here is only mineral, and the lume is mediocre at best, but in most scenarios, the Continental is a pretty snazzy watch with extra features for a competitive price. I do wish they'd change the bracelet clasp though, as while it fits me, the lack of micro adjustment holes may be a barrier for some. Both styles look awesome on wrist though, with a slim case wearing very flush to the arm. You've probably spotted another diver-inspired GMT on the Timex site by now, this being the popular and similarly named Q-Timex GMT. This is basically a reworked version of the Q-Timex Reissue Dive-Style watch that saw major success back in 2019 due to its sporty styling and moderate price tag. This GMT version is better than the original in virtually every way. It's got a more detailed dial, has an improved bracelet, and also comes in a more stylish assortment of colours. Side by side, it really is no contest. The original almost looks like a knockoff in comparison. Not only is this GMT really skinny like the last one, but the 38mm width makes it even more versatile. Overall, I love this watch, and it sees a ton of wrist time, which I've always considered more important than strong on-paper specifications. Big specs are no good if the watch spends most of its time sat in a drawer. Unlike some other Timex quartz watches, this one is also dead silent, as it uses a Swiss movement rather than the noisier Chinese or Japanese movements usually used by Timex. My primary headache is just the lack of adjustment holes, despite the bracelet being better than its forebearer. The links are quite small, but it's far from ideal. I'll definitely test this one out on more straps in the future, but even with this downside, I still love it. For a retail price of around £200, you really can't get a better GMT for the money. When browsing the Timex site, you may also have noticed the Rolex-like Harborside Coast. At first, this one looks like a strong low-end contender, coming in at an aggressive price, especially on grey market sites, and with a very thin case that still retains a decent 100-meter water resistance rating. I hoped it might be a good Casio Duro rival. Sadly, the cartoonishly noisy bezel and subpar brass case let down the snazzy sunburst dial and skinny profile. Yeah, a couple of sites do have this listed as stainless steel, but no, it is brass. So I'd stick to some of the models I've linked in the video description instead, which are built better for similar cash. If you want to stick with Timex, the Deepwater Reef watches are generally far better options, though they are more expensive. The most popular model is the £400 Deepwater Reef Titanium, with its sexy gunmetal case. It's so popular in fact that it's sold out at the time of making this video, so for now you'll have to cope with my footage of the lower cost steel quartz version instead. Unlike the previous one, this one is actually a solid option, with a sapphire crystal, 200 meters of water resistance, a screw-down crown, and even an Omega-inspired wave-adorned dial. The hour markers are even created out of solid blocks of luminescence, giving the Deepwater Reef bright low-light performance that trumps most $200 offerings. That's quite rare for Timex, for whom lume has never really been a strength. This watch offers some of that retro skin diver shaping, with the squared off lugs and in this instance a gunmetal PVD coating with much better finishing than I expected from the stock images. Other versions do come with the more typical steel finish. While not ceramic, the bezel has a clean, precise action with no backplay, and even the strap packed a surprise or two. The quality is great, The buckle is nicely case matched, and it even has this slick cubby hole you can use to tuck away the excess. Even the adjustment holes are tightly bunched together so you can make finer than average adjustments pretty easily. You can grab the Deepwater Reef models on steel bracelets too, but honestly, I'd save the cash and stick with the rubber strap instead. They also just released a carbon fiber cased version for a few quid more if you prefer that material. Overall, this feels like a genuinely viable Casio Duro alternative, where you can spend a bit more to get a bit more watch. You get improvements to the strap, loom, case finishing, crystal and sizing, with its widest point being 41.5mm at the bezel with a 40mm case size. So for many of you, it'll be much more wearable. It even comes in a GMT version if you're feeling extra curious. I was feeling curious about Timex's chronograph offerings and ended up finding quite a few solid choices. The most unique offerings were their pair of pilot-themed Flyback chronographs, with their unconventional retro layouts. Here we have the standard black Flyback, as well as this special edition Pan Am version featuring an added two-tone bezel. As you can probably tell, these offer some added functionality over a standard quartz, but they actually have even more going on than you might think. Timex usually relies on Japanese third-party movements from the likes of Seiko and Miyota, but here they're using what appears to be an in-house intelligent quartz 363 module made in the Philippines. Not much is known about this movement, and the absence of documentation makes understanding it unnecessarily tricky, but you can learn about all its functions via the online manual or some YouTube videos, and some of these features are quite clever. First up, you have the namesake Flyback functionality. With normal chronographs, you can time stuff using the pushers. When starting a new lap, you have to pause the chronograph with the top pusher, reset with the lower pusher, and then restart the timing process again with the top one. Most of the time, you also have to wait for the chronograph hand to travel clockwise all the way around the dial back to 12. These Flyback watches are slightly different. While the chrono hand is operating, you can immediately pop the bottom pusher and it will near instantly begin timing another lap. No second press needed. You'll also notice that if the chronograph hand hasn't yet passed the 6 o'clock marker, it will travel anti-clockwise to get back to the start position quicker. It also takes into account the time taken to do this, so it will always resume a couple of seconds into the next lap to compensate. What's more, the chronograph hand boasts a mechanical-like sweep, and you can even activate other functions, including a second time zone indicator and a special chronograph hand alignment feature to ensure it never slips out of alignment. Those features are undoubtedly neat, even if not the most readily used, but the unusual placement of those registers at 5 and 10 o'clock is what provides these watches with their distinct character. You get a totally different vibe to almost everything in the sub $200 category, where you often have many similarly styled watches using the same handful of movements. The two sub-dials here are primarily used for displaying elapsed time in hours and minutes. The Pan Am version is more expensive, at about £260, while the standard model is around £100 less. As for which I prefer, well, I do think the Pan Am is better. The case is better finished, the dial is crisper with more detail, and the bezel is silky smooth and satisfying. For the price, the 22mm strap is mediocre though. There are certain elements I prefer with the lower cost model. The colour scheme and hands are really period appropriate, with the stretched out date wheel being a particular highlight. The main downside with that one is the flatness of everything on the dial. I still feel like they're interesting options for the money given the exotic functions and unconventional appearance. They do only have mineral glass though, so I'd try to use a sizable discount code if you can to bring them down to a fairer price. One watch that outdoes its price is the Q-Timex Chronograph. On paper, this is nothing special. It's got average materials and specs for a modern vintage-inspired quartz watch, but boy does it over-deliver in the flesh. You don't need a fancy camera or expensive lighting setup to make this one look awesome. It does all the hard work for you. In fact, the Q Chronograph would probably look good on your nana's dumb phone photographs. The big boxed crystal, the retro case shape, the glossy dial, everything is on point. You might have noticed I bought two of these, and that's because these colorways give you a completely different experience. This braceleted navy version offers up some smart casual feels, while the gilded version gives you a dressier 1920s bling bling vibe, especially on this black leather strap. Here it is on my 6¼ inch wrist. It's a touch too big for me at exactly 40mm, but still wears quite compactly due to the short hooded lug arrangement, which allows the bands to drop off at steep angles if required. As for the straps themselves, they're serviceable. The black eco-friendly leather strap on this version is the weaker of the two options. It's edge painted and has quick release tabs, but the amount of surface creasing doesn't fill me with confidence about its long-term durability. The bracelet is more promising. As while it again commits the crime of omitting micro adjustments, it does at least have tiny links that make this a non-issue. You'll probably get a great fit, and it's a lot better than the bracelet on the standard Q-Timex. For a regular quartz chronograph, The pushes here are also surprisingly satisfying to use, with a feel close to that of a Mecha Quartz or even a budget mechanical movement. Under the hood is the Seiko Epson YM12A, which I'm not sure I've ever encountered before. When factoring in its semi-smooth chronograph hand and overall quiet operation, this is probably the best battery-powered chronograph movement I've tried, outside of Mecha Quartz options. Of the two colors, I undoubtedly prefer the blue version. For some reason, the dial on this one is much more lustrous, with a shiny, inky tone that looks far more high-end. At a distance, the Q Chronograph looks very luxurious for what's typically a sub £200 watch, depending on configuration and discounts. If you look closely, you will see where corners have been cut, but I'd struggle to name any chrono that's classier for the price. Gutted that this isn't smaller for my skinny arm. I have also briefly tried the Marlin Tachymeter Chronograph, which is a dressier, Art Deco-inspired alternative. The stock strap on that model is better than the Q, and it's also pretty attractive in its own right, with the dressier design incorporating heavily stylized 1920s accents and a lovely sunburst finish. That model is also 40mm wide and wears similarly to the Q, though it is pretty thick for a watch of its style. I'd have preferred the Marlin to be considerably thinner, even if a good portion is occupied by the steeply domed crystal. It does have a VK63 Mecha Quartz inside, which some would consider slightly better than that in the Q, and it also comes in some scrumptious vintage colours. Personally, I still prefer the Q, but the Marlin is undoubtedly a viable substitute, especially if you want something with a dressier overall appearance. Still, Timex's bread and butter has always been, and will probably continue to be, field watches. Timex has produced so many over the years that it's challenging to separate the winners from the losers. Luckily, I've tried most of them, so here are my overall thoughts. Essentially, I think there are two ways you can go here. First, if you're on an extreme budget, I'd recommend opting for the super low-cost Expedition camper watches. True, they are basic as far as construction is concerned, but hey, they're dirt cheap, they're light and comfortable, and many even ship with an Indiglo nightlight by default. Because they're plastic, it doesn't really matter when they inevitably get beaten up, and you won't have to worry too much about corrosion or anything like that. Unless you can get them for a similar price, I'd generally avoid the more expensive brass-cased watches, of which there are a multitude on grey market sites. These watches, such as the Expedition Scout and Weekender, are okay, but are rendered obsolete by rival military-inspired offerings from Japanese and Chinese brands. The likes of Loris, Addy's Dive and Bultony all offer models with vastly better specs, materials, looks, and detailing for similar money. I'll link some of those below as well for you if you're interested. In general, with Timex, I think you're better off holding out for some of the more expensive £100 plus models, which are much more competitive. Timex splits these between its performance-centric Expedition range and its retro-inspired MK1 range. Now, I'm a sucker for mid-century design, so the latter is my preferred camp. In fact, Timex revamped the MK1 line mere weeks ago, with these two pieces leading the way: the 40mm MK1 Automatic and the 36mm MK1 Mechanical. At launch, these went viral on social media, and the automatic variant sold out almost instantly, partly off the back of some impressive product imagery and its Hamilton-like design. Now, the automatic is decent, and I can see why it sold out. It looks stunning on camera, has a great strap, and feels nice and sturdy thanks to the automatic movement within. Yep, the cheaper mechanical is still my pick of the two. Of course, this one fits me better, I'm biased, but aside from that, I just think this has a cleaner, more attractive dial with more proportional numbers and text. Because it uses a smaller hand-wound movement, this version is substantially thinner too, so the watch can accommodate pass-through straps with ease. The 36mm also has a slightly darker dial, giving it a touch more contrast that I think looks better. And yeah, it's just something about the chapter ring just draws me in. Nonetheless, you can't go wrong with either of these, with their primary shortcoming being the underwhelming 5-bar water resistance, which is on the lower side for a field watch. I also think the automatic is a little pricey, considering it's only using a Miyota 8215, which is a basic and fairly loud automatic. The seagull movement in the hand-wound model is also an entry-level choice, but I feel like the price gap between the two still shouldn't be quite so large. If you're more bothered about pure durability and function, the Expedition North Field Post Collection is probably a better bet. Here you have a choice between a 38mm mechanical and a solar, which ships in both 36 and 41mm variants. These offer up a slightly more modern look with a stepped chapter ring, matte blasted cases, and a selection of tactical colours that better suit the 21st century aesthetic. The mechanical is again a decent Hamilton khaki alternative with a near identical design, however it's the solar model that really stands out to me. For a considerably lower cost, this one packs in everything you need. It's got the sapphire crystal and the 10-bar water resistance the last one was missing, as well as that highly practical movement type which just works. This model also offers a threaded crown and screwed caseback for extra aquatic peace of mind. A boon of this movement is also the fact it isn't plagued by the insanity-causing ticking noise characteristic of many lower-end Timex field watches. The strap is only reasonable, but I still think it's a good package overall, with the extra size options just being a bonus. I either lost or sold my one of these a while back and do regret it, though the MK1 may still be my preferred choice. There's a reason I'm wearing it. Timex also has some meatier options if you want something with a bit more wrist presence. The most popular choice in this category is probably the Expedition North Titanium. Despite sharing nomenclature with the previous two watches, this piece is quite the visual departure, with a completely different design and form factor. The black one I have here is the 41mm Automatic, which sits at around £330 at the time of recording. It gives off a similar vibe to the likes of the Citizen ProMaster Super Tough, with that hardy, chunky vibe paired with big numbers and an expansive high-contrast dial. The hands also add in some pilot watch hints, leaving you with a purely rugged, militaristic appearance. I'm unsure exactly what grade of titanium this model is made out of, but I get the immediate impression it'll hold up better than most of Citizen's super titanium watches, which scratch far more readily than you might expect. Perhaps I should compare the two one day. Either way, this one has a nicely textured dial, a sapphire crystal, as well as strong low light performance thanks to the markers, which appear to be constructed directly from chunks of loom. Again, this one only uses the low-tier Miyota 8215, which is a shame, albeit its thickness doesn't matter a great deal here, as bulbosity is already a part of this watch's design. The Expedition Titanium also comes in a 38mm quartz variant. Both versions also say shock resistant on the dial, and are apparently ISO 1413 certified to back this up. It's not quite G-Shock levels of performance, but it is an internationally recognized standard, so this model should hold up better than most other field watches. The strap is again one of Timex's eco-friendly reduced water straps, which is pretty mid in terms of feel. It's quite dry and has a minuscule buckle considering the watch's bulk. On the topic of size, we now move to the largest and arguably coolest watch on this list, the new 45mm Expedition Tide-Temp-Compass. Now this piece has some sweet party tricks that I think you'll be pretty impressed by, this time powered by Timex's M314 movement. As the name suggests, it's got pusher-operated functions that record the time and temperature, and can also work as a makeshift compass. As someone with ADHD, I'd be lying if I said I made it through the manual, but I simply had to show you the compass feature. How sick is this? If you fancy yourself as an adventurer and don't want a smartwatch, I reckon this could prove to be a fairly useful device. And I have to say, I don't think it's that unattractive either. These more complex watches always have extra clutter, and this is no exception. While the dial here is pretty basic with a lot of printing and cheap hour markers, I can't escape the feeling it's fairly attractive overall, even if its huge profile dwarfs my tiny arm. You may also notice the very peculiar bracelet. It's like a half-integrated one with cheeky little end links that are screwed into place from the sides. The bracelet then shifts to 22mm wide from the next link onwards. No micro adjustments is really stupid though, especially for a non-standard bracelet with large links. You know what's also stupid? The vast majority of Amazon's choice watches. In the video on screen, I tested an entire collection of these best sellers, and wow, I thought I had bad taste.